Hi, I'm Dan Severson. I'm running for Secretary of State for the state of Minnesota, and I want to talk with you just for a moment about my experience, why I think I'm the best person for this job, and actually why I'm running. I retired from the Navy in 2000. I was a Navy commander. I had charge of F-18 squadron, was weapons test squadron executive officer, worked in Washington, D.C. for 3 years, and served on the USS Midway. Got about 270 carrier landings there, about 3,200 hours of flight time, and 22 years serving my country. It was a blast. I loved it, and it was very fulfilling. At that time, I retired. I went into the private sector, got involved in a startup company, and did a patent dealing with light-emitting diodes with 2 other people. It's a patent that's still being worked today. And in 2002, got asked to run for the Minnesota House of Representatives. I won by 315 votes out of 15,000 cast, so I know how important voting is. And served 4 terms in the Minnesota House on various committees, and my last term in leadership as the minority whip. It was during that time frame that I found out about some voter fraud that had taken place, not even in my district. It was in northern Minnesota. And I pursued resolution for that particular person, and what I found out spurred me to run for Secretary of State in 2010. And what I found out was there were people that had come in on buses that had been vouched for, and when I asked during the investigation if I could see those voucher sheets, they said, well, we didn't have any. And as I pursued it all the way up to presenting it to the Supreme Court of Minnesota, they refused to hear it. And I thought, you know what, if I as a sitting legislator can't get any traction on this, then the average citizen probably doesn't have the ability to do it either. And so that was kind of the beginning of my run for Secretary of State in 2010. I gave up my seat because I believe integrity in elections is probably one of the most important things that office does. Since that time frame, I've been working in some minority communities, reaching out to different communities to talk about how we can give them a voice in the government sector. And so we've been working in the different communities and creating relationship, and through my nonprofit have had tremendous success at creating confidence for those communities and allowing them to participate in our government process. The other thing that I want to talk about besides the election system is the business side as well. A large portion of the Secretary of State office deals with business. And for these new Americans, these minority communities, we have put obstacles in front of them that makes it very difficult for them to do business. And that's unfortunate because they come here with the desire to do business, to create a better future for themselves and for their families. And because of overregulation or certification or licensure requirements that the legislative bodies have put on, they are unable to start those businesses. And so my goal is to streamline business practices to give them a better way, a better chance at getting those business started and helping them once they're started. You can go to my website. It's danseverson.com. I've got my other solutions on there. The last thing I would like to talk about is the military vote. The military vote has basically disenfranchised our military from being able to participate in the election process. Military, in terms of, we have between 12 and 14,000 active duty military in Minnesota, and in 2010 only 700 were able to cast a vote that counts. That's less than 5%. And those are the individuals that are fighting for our freedoms on the front lines. I was at the State Fair, had a petition signed by over 1,000 people who said this is an important issue, and I believe to you and me it should be important. Those are the ones that should be able to vote, and their vote should count, and they should be the first ones to count. And so my commitment to you is, number one, I will move to audit the election system once elected, and I will work to put confidence back into the election office, the Secretary of State office. It will be nonpartisan. I commit to you that I will represent all Minnesotans equally, and everyone will have a voice to go to the Secretary of State's office. And so I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Dan Severson, running for Secretary of State. You can please go to my website at danseverson.com, and I've got a video on there that tells a little more about me and tells about the first 100 days of my commitment to you as the voters of Minnesota as your next Secretary of State. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Steve Simon, and I'm running for Minnesota Secretary of State. I'm running because I think what Minnesota needs in this position is someone who puts Minnesota's interests above politics. That's who I am, and that's what I always have been. A little bit about myself: I'm from Hopkins, Minnesota. That's where I grew up. That's where I went to school from elementary through high school, graduated from Hopkins High School. And that's where I live today with my wife Leah and our 2 children under 2, Hannah and Noah. It's a great place to live. It was a great place to grow up. And for the last 10 years, I've represented Hopkins and the city of St. Louis Park in the Minnesota legislature, which has been a tremendous honor for me, not only because it's a seat at the table and a chance to do a lot of good, but because I get to represent my hometown and my old stomping grounds as well. So it's been a true privilege. But ever since I got to the Minnesota legislature 10 years ago, I've been particularly eager to work on issues relating to elections, the very issues that relate to this office of Secretary of State. So things like ballot access, election reform, voter rights, those have really been my passion and the things I've been most involved in and really the most proud of. And I think the reason, if I had to trace back why am I interested in election law and making sure people have easy access to the right to vote? To me, it's kind of an immigrant story, which is very familiar to most Minnesotans. So in that respect, I'm not unique because many of us have a similar story. But my particular case is that my great-grandparents on my dad's side came to this country from Poland and Lithuania in Eastern Europe. And they were part of a group that was not well treated, that was oppressed, and that didn't have a lot of opportunities. They had no voice, they had no say in how they were governed, and they certainly didn't have any kind of vote. And so they came to this country, and I like to say that they didn't just immigrate to this country, they fled. They fled from Eastern Europe, and they came to Minnesota, originally to northern Minnesota, and when they came here, they had those things. They had a say, they had a voice, and ultimately, yes, they had a vote, things that they never had in the old country. And that's something always worth remembering, not just for me, but I think for everyone. A lot of people have fought and bled and even died for our right to vote. It's worth protecting, it's worth defending, it's worth strengthening. And that's what the Office of Secretary of State does and is supposed to be about. So I take that very seriously, and it would be an honor to serve in that position. Over the last 10 years, I've gotten some great results, and gotten results on a bipartisan basis with Democrats and Republicans supporting some key reforms. And let me give one example of the thing that I'm most proud of. In 2013, we passed a new law in Minnesota that takes effect this year for 2014. It's called No Excuses Absentee Voting. That's its technical kind of wonky title. But really what it means is vote from home. It means that any one of us in Minnesota can now vote from home, vote from our kitchen table if we want to, for any reason or no reason at all. The old reason, or the old method, you may remember, if you wanted to vote absentee, was that you had to fill out a form and sign an oath under penalty of perjury saying, really promising, that you were going to be out of town that day. Well, that didn't work for a lot of people. For one, there was some white lying going on anyway. But for another, I think with people's increasingly busy lives, it isn't always easy to do voting as a one-shot deal anymore. And so why not make it so that people can vote in an easier fashion? I think of my own dad, who's 80 years old. He's got advanced Parkinson's. He uses a walker. He doesn't drive. Why should someone like that have to give an alibi or an excuse for why they need the added comfort and convenience of voting from home? They shouldn't, and now they don't. And I'm proud of that. And just as proud of the result, I'm proud of the fact that I found common ground. I currently chair the House Elections Committee, and in that capacity, and in shepherding this legislation through, I got Republicans and Democrats, people who otherwise wouldn't agree on much, to come together for this common sense reform, and now both major political parties are touting it and encouraging it and promoting it. I'm proud of that, because ultimately the Secretary of State's office is about working together, it is about putting politics aside, and it is fundamentally about opening the doors to participation, to voting, to registration for all eligible voters in Minnesota, no matter what. That's a good thing, keeping those doors open and not slamming them in people's faces. So I've been proud about that, and I've been proud about other things like online voter registration, a bill that I also authored that got the support of Democrats and Republicans, or legislation a few years ago that made it much easier for our overseas military and other Minnesotans living overseas to have their vote actually count. Those are the kinds of things that are important in choosing the next Secretary of State. Someone who knows these issues, works for access, for balloting, and for registering, but also works together with people who might not agree with him or her. So that's the future of this office. The stakes are high. We know from recent recounts, whether it's Franken and Coleman and others, that this office really does matter. Again, my name is Steve Simon. I'd be honored to be your Secretary of State to make sure that we put Minnesota's interests first.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I'm Bob Helland, and I'm the endorsed and nominated Independence Party candidate for Minnesota Secretary of State. I'm happy to be here on a Saturday morning with Northern Suburbs CTV. Thank you for having me. To all the viewers, thank you for listening. It's important that all candidates have an opportunity to reach Minnesota voters or their local voters, and I appreciate the work done by organizations like this and people like you who are interested to hear what we have to say. I know I don't look like a typical politician. I have long hair, a beard, and I'm a bit more youthful than most of the people that run for this race. I'm 29 years old, and I would be the youngest elected statewide executive in the United States of America. For me, that's very important. We need to get young people involved in the political system. And that's a big part of what the Secretary of State does as the Chief Elections Administrator in the state. There's a couple points I want to talk about today. I have 5 minutes, unedited, free time where I can speak to you, and that's a great podium, and I don't want to miss an opportunity. The 3 things I want to talk about are the fact that I'm the business services candidate in the race. I worked for the Minnesota Department of Revenue for 5 years as a business registration expert. And it was very important to me that I worked well with all the other agencies in the streamline of setting up a business in the state, which is very complex. Many people don't know that the Secretary of State's pretty much a first stop for new LLCs or corporations or businesses filing for an assumed name to get set up and get registered and to be a part of our public information systems here in Minnesota. Speaking of information systems, I'm also the technology candidate in this race. I've been working in information technology for many years. I started at a very young age in a family-owned software development business, and I've taken that knowledge through my college education. I went to St. Cloud State University and earned a degree in economics, and I went on to work for the state government as a software tester, a trainer of users who use the state software, and customer service specialists, as well as many other things. I currently work in information technology with large systems, and that experience is critical for the Office of Secretary of State because they have a lot of systems, particularly voting technology, that need to be upgraded. They need to be user-friendly, they need to be safe, they need to be secure, and it's really critical that we have an executive in that office who has the type of experience I have to make sure that we're testing out those systems, that they work well for the state and they work well for people like you who will be using them. The third thing I want to touch on is that democracy is for all of us. As a young person, I want to blaze a trail for young people that want to become candidates or become more involved in the state's political system or in American political systems. We need to start stepping up and assuming responsibility for the world we live in and the government that governs us. We have more say than we tend to feel, and I think I can be a messenger of that to young people and older people alike, to those older people who have watched the 2 parties kind of monopolize political races in this country and in the state. We need to show them that we have third parties that give us viable options, that are qualified candidates, and that can lead as effectively or more effectively than the 2-party options that were often presented. So again, my name is Bob Helland. I'm the endorsed and nominated Independence Party candidate for Minnesota Secretary of State. I'm the business services candidate in the race. I want to help young people, immigrants, people with disabilities, everyone have access to starting up the businesses or nonprofits that are their dreams so they can chase those dreams and be a part of our civil society. I'm the technology candidate in this race who's going to make sure that the systems that we prepare and deliver to you will be high functioning, and they will be safe, and they will be secure. We will make public information public, and we will keep private information private. And lastly, we need to all become more involved in our political system. Voting once a year or every 4 years or every 2 years is insufficient in terms of meeting our civic responsibility. I can be the Secretary of State that educates people about civic responsibilities. Many people don't know that the Secretary of State prepares a student's edition of the legislative manual, that they are involved in the Uniform Commercial Code access, and that they administer the Safe at Home program for domestic abuse survivors. We need to learn about these things, and I want to be the person that teaches Minnesota and helps give you access to our systems. I'm Bob Helland. Thank you for watching. Please find me online.